I saw the rain outside today and I thought we might see some canoes in the parking lot, but we didn't. But it's a little hard to complain about the rain when you consider what's happening around the world, so sometimes prayer helps us put that in perspective. At least it does for me. Well, we're coming to the end of this series. And the background question for this series is simply this: what does it mean to be human? I think even in prayer today, we're reminded of the inhumanity that we often express one to another, our proclivity to violence that seems to be displayed all throughout the world. And so part of what we're asking is, what does it mean to be ideally human? What's the ideal that we're after? But also we're asking this question: what is the value of being human in the light of rapid advancements in technology that mimics and sometimes even replaces human engagement? We're talking about AI and technologies and stuff that's been around for a long time. Even the common dishwasher. Have you ever thought about that? Do you remember growing up in a time when we washed the dishes together? I have welts on my leg from my brothers when they used to snap the towels, right? And we learned to do that quite well. There's a form of human engagement, also violence, but also a form of human engagement. It's funny how sometimes we peg AI as being the great threat to human engagement, but technology all throughout the ages has called into question, what does it mean to be in human community now? What does it mean to engage with one another? So this is not a new thing entirely that we're facing as a humanity. But that's the questions that we're asking. As we turn to the Bible, we have some answers. And we haven't explored all the theology of this. What I hope to do is to use this as a conversation starter, as something of a catalyst that you can then take. But in the Bible, we realize that humanity, you and I, are unique in God's creation. We have a unique identity. We are made in the image of God, right? We have a unique calling. We're called to be stewards of creation. My dog is wonderful, but she would not make a good steward of creation, right? We have a unique calling. We have a unique capacity as well. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11. And it says that God has placed eternity in the human heart. And that verse is so loaded for me. There's all kinds of nuances of meaning. At its core, it's basically saying that there's a longing for more. There's a recognition in our hearts as humans that there's more to life than just what we see. But there's also this capacity for eternity that Jesus brings to light when he comes and he dies and raises again from the dead. This is uniquely human, a unique capacity that we have. But we also know, and we've highlighted this already, that there's a dark side to the human experience, right? We also know that there is sin as part of the human experience. Not the ideal human experience, but it's part of our human experience, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But there's also weakness, and there's failure as part of the human experience. But in the midst of all that, we also are unique in all creation in that we have the opportunity to experience God's grace and God's forgiveness and restoration and salvation like nothing else in all of creation. And so that's very uniquely human. So Peter, he confesses the truth about Jesus. We looked at that last week. This great moment where he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." But then just a short time later, what does he do? Do you remember? He denies Jesus 3 times, right? That is like the human experience wrapped up in one episode. This great capacity for truth, for beauty, for goodness, and at the same time falling flat on our face. And that's Peter, and I think that's why we're looking at him. And so the episode that we're going to read about Peter today is post-resurrection. So it's after the resurrection of Jesus. And this episode is considered the restoration of Peter. And I'm sure it'll be at least somewhat familiar to you. So let's read it together. John chapter 21 and verses 1 to 19. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. Which I just love his direction, even though it's sometimes misguided. But this is Peter. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out, got into a boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" Talk about rubbing salt in the wound, right? "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped in the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The 3rd time, he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." There's so much in this passage, and we don't have time to cover it, and we're going to focus on one particular element of it. And so we're going to get to that in a moment. We've been exploring snapshots of Peter's humanity in order to see not only his humanity, but also to see our human experience within that. So let's recap that quickly as we go through, and we've discovered a few things about Peter's humanity and our humanity as well. First of all, we've discovered that to be human is to answer God's call. To be human is to answer God's call. And so if we want to preserve our humanity, we have to preserve the skill of listening to the voice of God. That's so important. Second thing we see is that to be human is to step out courageously. To be human is to take risks in obedience to the call of God. And that's something else of our human experience. And then we found in Peter, to be human is to confess the truth about Jesus. Humanity has to be a people, we have to be a people who love the truth, who know the truth and proclaim the truth, but especially the truth about Jesus. That's our particular gift to the world at this time. And today we're going to see this. To be human is to care deeply. In a world increasingly shaped by efficiency, productivity, and even artificial intelligence, Jesus reminds Peter and all of us that the defining mark of humanity is not intelligence or achievement, but compassion. That is meant to be the defining mark of true humanity, compassion. We live in the most technologically advanced era of human history. Artificial intelligence, of course, can write your essay for you, can generate artwork, can compose music if you want a song to your sweetheart for Valentine's Day or your anniversary. You don't have to do that yourself anymore, right? AI can do it for you. AI can answer complex questions, even imitate human conversation with astonishing realism. But there is one thing AI cannot genuinely do. It cannot love. That's what we have to remember. It can simulate empathy, and it does that, but it cannot experience compassion. It can recognize patterns of emotion, but it cannot carry another person's burden. It can predict what you need to hear or want to hear, but it cannot willingly lay down its life for another. That's the distinction. That's the limitations. And so when Jesus restores Peter after his greatest failure, he doesn't test Peter's theology. He doesn't even test his leadership ability or ministry potential. He asks one question: do you love? Do you love me? Because love, not performance, is what makes us truly human. So let's explore this passage together, not all the facets of the passage, but from this particular vantage point of Peter's question and interaction with Jesus. There's three movements that we want to explore together. The first one is this: receive. Jesus says, come and have breakfast. And I absolutely love this. Peter arrives at the shore carrying not only the weight of the fish, which must have been amazing. Why was there 153? Why was that important? Someone can research that and come back to me next week or later on and say, why 153? But that's a lot of fish. And Peter brings it to shore. But he's not only carrying the weight of the net, he's carrying the weight of his failure. Only days earlier, he had denied Jesus 3 times. And imagine that awkwardness of seeing Jesus on the shore, the guilt and the shame that Peter would have carried into this conversation. But how does Jesus respond? He cooks breakfast for them. It's such a beautiful thing. There's a word that John uses here for the fire, and I think we've discussed this before, anthrakia or anthrakia, and it's only used twice in the Bible. John uses it in John chapter 18, when Peter gathers around the coal fire when he denies Jesus 3 times. Now, Jesus is standing in front of what? Anthrakia, a coal fire. Can you imagine how that would have triggered Peter's memory, right? And it's this beautiful literary device that John is using to connect the two events. But as Peter comes to the coal fire, he finds God's grace in Jesus Christ. The first thing that Peter experiences after his failure is not condemnation, it's the kindness of God. It's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. That's the beautiful thing. And it's the same all throughout Scripture. This isn't new. God hasn't suddenly changed his mind in how he's going to respond to people's failure. We see this with Adam and Eve, right? Even after they failed, God knew it, but he still came down and to walk with them in the garden. And afterwards, even then they realized they were naked, he made clothing for them. That's the kind of kindness of God that we find. Or you think of Elijah, when he just timed out and he ran. And what did God do for him? He provided a meal and said, rest, recover. The prodigal son, we could talk about that story again. What happens when the father sees the son? He runs to him, prepares a meal. This is the consistency of God's attitude toward our failure and even our sin. I was doom scrolling. Do you know what that is? When you're on Facebook and you just get trapped in these reels or there's videos and you're just going through it. And it's like, wow, how did half an hour pass by? And I didn't even realize it with these 10-second clips. But every once in a while, I find something that's worth sharing with my wife. And sometimes she looks at me and says, why did you share that? It's not even funny. It was hilarious. It was honestly funny. Anyway, I was watching just some random videos. And I came across this one, and maybe you've seen it. And it was a security camera footage. And there's these 2 young boys, maybe 8, 10 years old, and they were playing in an old truck out front of this yard on a rural property. And somehow they managed to release the parking brake on this truck, right? Or they knocked it out of gear or something like that, and the truck started to roll away from the house. And you're wondering, oh no, what's going to happen? And then suddenly the boys, they get out of the truck. They jump out of the truck. And then you see the dad, which we assume is the dad, running like a madman toward the truck, thinking he's going to try and get in and put the brake on. But the truck's way too fast, way too much momentum, and he's running down, and you're intrigued, you're gripped by this silly video that's somehow on your feed online, and you're waiting for what's going to happen, and the truck rolls over the edge of the embankment and just tumbles. Boom, 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 boom. It's done. It's done. And the two boys are standing there now in the yard, and the dad's hands are in the air, and he turns around, and now you're wondering what's going to happen. Is he going to be so angry that he yells at them? Is he going to smack them? Like, what's going to happen next? Do you know what he does? He gets down on his knees and he puts his arms out, and his boys run to him and he hugs them. What a beautiful thing. What a good thing to do as a dad. And that's what Jesus does with Peter here. That's what God does as the father with the prodigal son, right? He embraces us. That dad knew that the most important thing was protected. The truck can be replaced, but not these two, right? And that's what I think of now when I think of this story of what Jesus is doing with Peter. It's this embrace. Here's the important thing that I want to draw from this as a conclusion. Christian compassion never begins with trying harder. It begins with receiving the grace of Christ. I think we need to realize that as disciples of Jesus. We don't follow Jesus better by trying harder. I think we make that mistake a lot. You know, we wake up and we look in the mirror and we're like, today you're going to be nicer. You're going to be kinder to those people on Deerfoot as you go down the road, right? You're not going to yell and scream as much. And we grit our teeth and we're like, I'm going to double down. I'm going to try real harder. But the Christian life is not about that. It's not about trying harder. It begins with receiving the grace of Christ. We think of our own hurt and our own wounds, our own failures, our own sin. It's only after we begin to experience the grace of Christ, freeing us from guilt and from shame, when we experience the forgiveness of Jesus, then we are equipped to share that with others. That's what's happening in this story with Peter. Before Peter becomes a shepherd, he first has to experience the shepherd. We cannot give away the compassion that we have never received. We need to be on the receiving end of God's grace. As John later writes in 1 John chapter 4, we love because he first loved us. That's the equation that we need to hold on to. So that's the first movement, receive. Peter just needed to come and receive that warm embrace, receive breakfast from Jesus. Here's the second movement that we see in the passage. We're going to call it restore. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Jesus asks 3 times. There were 3 denials, right? And now there's these 3 questions. And Jesus isn't rubbing Peter's failure in his face by reminding him of the 3 times. Instead, he's bringing healing. He's healing it. Notice that Jesus doesn't ask, why did you fail, Peter? Why did you let me down? Can I ever trust you again? Will you promise to never do that again? Right? That's not the attitude that Jesus takes. Instead, he simply asks, do you love me? Because the foundation of discipleship is not perfection, it's love. That's the foundation of our following Jesus. Jesus restores Peter by reminding him that his failure is not the end of his story. I don't know who needs to hear that today, but I feel that some of us do. Your failure is not the end of your story. And that's the message that comes through with Peter. God's grace doesn't ignore failure. God's grace doesn't ignore sin. It's not a simply sweeping it under the rug. That's not what's happening. But God's grace rewrites our future. And that's what's happening with Peter. Many people live as though their worst moment defines them. But Peter's story says otherwise. Our greatest failure does not have to become our final identity. There was a time period between churches. I was back framing houses, and I decided to try and go out on my own and do some repairs. I deeply admire people who work on their own to like repair houses and do construction, because I quickly found out I could not do it. I'm not a great businessman, so I was doing all sorts of stuff for free. I'd show up at people's house and I'd be like, I can't charge them for this, that I just have to do it. And so that's not a good business model, generally speaking. And so that became very hard. But I also found myself out of my depth more than once. And I didn't have AI to help me, to find out, YouTube videos and stuff like that. And so still, even to this day, I will wake up, like when it's raining, I'm thinking of this one particular window that I installed. And to this day, I'm not sure that I did it right. And sometimes I wonder, man, are those people, is it leaking? Is it leaking today? Do you have that in your life where you look back and suddenly something will remind you of this past failure and it just strangely haunts you? And then it starts to call you out and drag you down and you feel that sense of failure all over again. And we have to be so careful with that. And there's a beautiful moment that's happening here with Peter and Jesus. And Jesus saying, yeah, that's a reality. It's not going to change. Your failure, right? Your denial. But it's not your identity. It doesn't need to define your future. And that's what's happening here. Every saint has a past, said Oscar Wilde. Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. And I like that. The gospel is more than forgiveness, it's restoration. And this is the beautiful opportunity about what it means to be human. This salvation aspect, even angels long to look into it, to understand it, to know it. But this is the human experience, and it's beautiful. Okay, the third movement in the text as we go through this return. The return of Peter to his call, the return of Peter to his purpose. Jesus says, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. Jesus doesn't say to Peter, okay, now go build an impressive ministry, write some great sermons, become a YouTube sensation, something like that, right? He says, feed, care, shepherd. Love for Jesus is always demonstrated by loving other people. And Jesus directs Peter in that way. Every time, in fact, that Peter affirms his love for Jesus, Jesus immediately redirects that love toward people, toward others. Do you notice that? Such a beautiful thing that we see. And Peter never forgot this conversation. Years later, he wrote, and it's recorded in 1 Peter chapter 5, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care. And he was writing to the leaders of the church. He learned his lesson from Jesus on the beach, right? And now he's instructing the leaders of the church to do the same. We had a congregational meeting just last week, and it was great to have a large number of members come out, and we nominated some new elders, some new shepherds to serve among us. And we're going to have a special commissioning service for them in September. So all come back for that, and we'll have a celebration. But I do want to mention them today within the congregation. So we have 3 elders who have served their term of 3 years and are now stepping down to go serve in other ways. All of them are actually serving in other ways. But we think of Lori and George and Linda Ferguson. All have served as elders, and now they're finished their term and they've stepped back. So can we thank them for what they've done? They served well because they shepherded God's flock. They shepherded you and me. They cared for us in a particular way. Now we have 2 new elders that have joined the board and who will be joining Boris and Alex and Isabel, Bill and Marissa. And the 2 new elders, Mike Paradis and Paul Park. And so we want to thank them for joining on this board. And my point in just declaring these leaders is I found my experience in this congregation is that the leaders who shepherd this flock, they genuinely do care. They are following the pattern that Jesus set for Peter and that Peter set for the church, right? How do we lead well? We care for others. We care for the church. So this beach experience that Peter had, it became the blueprint for the rest of his ministry, but also for the ministry of leadership in the church. And that's one of the things we're seeing here. So Christian maturity is not measured on how much we know. It's not measured on our ability or capacity. It's measured by our love. And Francis Schaeffer, some of you will know that name. My favorite quote from him is this: "The final apologetic is love." That's the final apologetic of the church. Okay, well, let's wrap this up together. So what does it mean to be truly human? We've been exploring that together just a little bit. And hopefully it's a conversation starter that you continue with. Peter's journey has given us at least 4 answers, even more if we had more time to go into it. But to be human is to answer God's call, right? To be human is to step out with courage. To be human is to confess the truth, especially the truth about Jesus. And finally, to be truly human in the way that Jesus intends for us is to care, to love, to care for one another. Computers can process information and AI can generate words. Even robots can perform tasks more than just cleaning your rugs and carpets and floors with your Roomba. They can do more and more these days. But only people created in the image of God can freely choose to love, to forgive, to serve, and to sacrifice. And that's why Jesus doesn't ask Peter, "Are you capable?" He asks, "Do you love? Do you love me?" To love one another is the essential commandment of Jesus. Jesus says, "I'm going to give you one thing, one commandment. Love one another." And he gave that because it is the essence of what it means to be truly human. Let's pray together.